We are here today at the Sussex Wildlife Trust Reserve Woods Mill with renowned recorder virtuoso Piers Adams and Learning and Engagement Officer James Duncan, and we're going to hear about the songbirds of Sussex. Since the earliest times, people have been fascinated with the sounds and music made by birds. Yet over the centuries, for many living in cities, life has become increasingly noisy, blotting out this musical landscape. But this spring, owing to lockdown, many people became acutely aware of what they had been missing when the dawn chorus was not drowned out by traffic. As long as 2,000 years ago, we were already seeing tribute paid to them in artworks, often focusing on that most talented songster, the nightingale. Later, medieval bestiaries are also full of birds, some images even including primitive musical notation in an attempt to copy the bird's song. Others showing birds not exactly famous for their musical voices, possibly singing to avoid becoming the director's supper. We humans have always admired birds for their grace, beauty and elegance and ability to fly, which medieval monks believed brought them nearer to the angels. But they have also been widely trapped by hunters, sometimes using their own music as a decoy. These birds were then kept in cages for entertainment. Popular pastimes included trying to teach the birds to sing songs composed for them. We'll be hearing some of these shortly. Flutes and recorders will always best imitate their basic sound, but will they ever be able to reproduce the complexity and sheer range of sounds that birds can make? Well, I can't think of a better player than our own bird charmer Piers Adams to compete with them, at least for virtuosity.
Birdsong can form a fantastic natural soundtrack to our own lives. Recognising and understanding birdsong may seem somewhat unfathomable, but to be honest with you, the rewards for doing so are so huge because it really will help you to notice an awful lot more birds. The complexity and variety in birdsong is partly due to an anatomical difference, which is that they possess a tubular organ known as a syrinx. Now this syrinx is located between the bottom of the windpipe and the lungs. Now in essence it serves a similar function to our own larynx, but it's located in a different position. And what happens is it has a couple of flaps in it, and these actually control the sound. But there's one key difference between the syrinx and the larynx, and that is the fact that the birds can control the flaps in the syrinx independently. So that means they're able to produce two sounds at the same time, which is a key reason why their vocalizations are so complex. Perhaps one of the key points to address is the difference between bird calls and bird song. Now, birds spend an awful lot of time listening to the vocalizations of other birds. Birds are actually able to process sound information much quicker than humans. But calls are generally relatively short. They're uttered by both sexes and they can be produced at pretty much any time of the year. Now, they're usually to serve a variety of different purposes. Song, however, is really quite different. Song tends to be uttered only by the males. It's usually at a specific time of year, and it has two key purposes, and those are basically to attract a mate and also to defend a territory. So usually it's the passerines or the songbirds that we interpret as singing, but actually sometimes it's not entirely clear whether birds are singing. So for example, is the song of the cuckoo or the tawny owl, is that song or is it a call? Sometimes it's a little bit subjective and it's how we interpret it. Whereas calls are thought to be innate, bird song is actually quite different, and it's thought that the juveniles really do have to learn the song from other adults. Now this may either be from their own parents or other birds that they happen to hear within the territory. Now they do go through very distinct stages of song, and these are usually known as sub-song or plastic song before the song becomes fully crystallized and more recognizable in the adult version. It's also rather important to realise that some birds have regional dialects or accents. Now, actually the chaffinch is one prime example of this. This is really a bird that may have quite a lot of variety in both its song and also what is known as its rain call. Now, this actually may be something that really helps to avoid inbreeding. Now, as well as regional dialects, birds also display an awful lot of mimicry. In fact, many species are fantastic at imitating other species that they've heard. Now, many of these will have heard these different birds singing in all manner of different habitats, and a number of well-known species, those such as the blackbird, the robin, the reed warbler, the jay, they're all really accomplished mimics. Now, having said that, none of our birds are as accomplished a mimic as the marsh warbler. The marsh warbler is absolutely phenomenal and is capable of imitating over 100 different bird species. Now, unfortunately, the marsh warbler is now a very rare breeding bird in the UK. Birdsong between species varies massively. Whereas some species' song may only be a couple of seconds, many have songs which may last for a minute or more. So think of species, for example, like the skylark and the reed warbler. Now, interestingly, some birds are actually named onomatopoeically for the song that they sing. So think of birds like the chiffchaff or the cuckoo or the kittiwake. These are all birds that are named after the sounds they make. Some birds are actually named colloquially after their songs. So for example, the lapwing, otherwise known as the peewit, is a great example of this, with this fantastic haunting peewit. A really, really great call. Now, the green woodpecker is also, or has been known for a long time as the yaffle, and the yaffle is basically another name for its laughing call. One of the most amazing things about bird song and bird calls is it's able to often evoke and conjure up some fantastic mental imagery for us. So some really well-known examples of this are perhaps the jangling keys of corn bunting song, the laughing tittering call of the little grebe, the camera shutter-like chacks of the fieldfare, the football rattle of the missel thrush, and of course Yellowhammer's song, which is renowned for being something like a little bit of bread and no cheese, and sometimes with a please on the end. Of course, we have a number of different songbirds here in Sussex, and most of them are pre-programmed to sing during the breeding season. However, the arrival of birds in summer and winter and numerous passage migrants does make things a whole lot more complicated. However, there are a whole range of species which you're most likely to hear in this county.
The recorder has had a long history of association with birdsong. It's actually thought that the name recorder comes from an old usage of the word to record. Now, record, of course, means two things: re, which is again, and cordi, from the heart. So a recorder is something that can reproduce something by memory from the heart. And of course, the recorder was a perfect instrument for this, because you could hear a tune and then you could just remember it and play it. And this is, of course, well before the days of any electronic recording devices. This was your home recorder. But another use of this word was specific to birdsong, and in fact it's a stage in a baby bird learning its mother's language, a particular stage where it's managed to pick up most of the sounds, and at that point it's said to be recording. And so it's thought this is where the instrument got its name from in the English language. Composers use the recorder very often to conjure up the sound of birds. So very often in say a Baroque opera, if there's a pastoral scene in which birdsong needs to be part of that scene, then they will wheel out a little sopranino recorder. An instance of this is in Handel's opera Acis and Galatea, in which Galatea is very lovesick, and the sound of the birds are making her feel even more melancholy, and so she tries to shut them up, and they keep coming back with this very persistent song. And drive her to even further distraction. Another composer who loved the sound of the recorder and in fact used it in a bird song context was Antonio Vivaldi, who wrote a wonderful concerto for recorder or for flute called The Goldfinch. I'm now going to play a piece of Renaissance music, which is a set of variations on the tune called The Woodcock. Now, James, I don't know what a woodcock actually even sounds like.
Well, Piers, the woodcock is a bird that actually has a very limited vocal repertoire. It's a very elusive bird of woodland and heathland, and to be honest, most of the year you're not going to see a woodcock because they're cryptically camouflaged against the forest floor. Now, when you are likely to see one is during spring, when they undertake these display flights, and they'll fly these big circles, and they're doing what's known as roading. So it's a kind of aerial lek of sorts, and during this roading, what they'll do is they'll tend to make this very guttural, almost amphibian-like sound that's a little bit like wop, wop, wop. So it's very distinctive, but not particularly tuneful.
Good. Well, at the end of every phrase in this piece, we do actually get these two low notes that go. So maybe that's the sound of the woodcock roading.
Okay, that sounds pretty good for a roading woodcock to me.
Not only did composers use the recorder to imitate birds, but actually bird fanciers used the recorder to teach birds to sing. And there are two volumes published in the early years of the 18th century, both of which were called The Bird Fancier's Delight. And one was an instructional manual on how to train songbirds to sing, and the other was a collection of 40-odd tunes which you could then teach to various birds. And they were quite specific, so the tunes are laid out, several for the bullfinch, some for the linnet, for the sparrow, for the woodlark, and so on.
The song thrush is actually the commonest member of its family to have thrush in the name. However, that is a bit misleading because the commonest thrush species is actually the blackbird. Now, the song thrush is a species that, well, it's one of a few species that is comprehensively defined by its song. It really is a fantastic singer, and it sings generally from sort of March through to July. Having said that, if the weather is mild in autumn, song thrushes will often start singing quite early, usually around about November. So you get the glorious opportunity to revel in their song for many, many months. While the song thrush rarely strays from cover, it is a bird species that will often sing from a prominent perch. Now, some people think that the song thrush is a superb singer, but actually its song tends to split public opinion like no other, because others feel it really does lack musicality. Now, certainly it doesn't have the same melodic tones as the blackbird, and it does somewhat tend to lack flow, but for song thrush there's one thing that is key, and that is repetition. It delivers its phrases really boldly with real gusto and very charismatically, but it's also a rather chatty, garrulous bird, and it always feels as if a song thrush has an awful lot to tell you, and it sure won't stop until it does. And in fact, even when it does, it wants to tell you again and again. Now, phrases might be delivered between 2 to 6 times, and it is actually this tendency that does leave some people a little bit cold about its song. But don't confuse this repetition for a lack of variety, because it has real variety, and it may deliver over 100 different phrases to its song. And actually some of these can be quite human-esque in their sound, and distinct phrases like "Did you do it? Did you do it?" and "Who are you? Who are you?" are actually really distinctive in the song. The nightingale really is a bird with a reputation for song like no other. In fact, there can be very few other birds with a more prodigious claim to the title of world's greatest songster than the nightingale. Now, in stark contrast to their vocal repertoire is their observability. They're really not an easy bird to see. In fact, most people have probably never seen a nightingale, even though they may have heard one. To be honest, even if you were to see one, they're a relatively dowdy looking bird. In essence, they look a little bit like a robin, but without the interesting red bit. For a bird that is so embedded and ingrained in our culture, the nightingale really is a species that inhabits some rather prosaic habitat. They're a real niche specialist, to be honest with you. And for a bird that is so well loved, we've actually known very little about the nightingale for an awful long time. So it's actually only in recent years that their migratory habits have really become more understood. Now, ironically, the nightingale actually translates to night songstress, which is rather inaccurate because A, it's the males that are singing, not the females, and also they don't only prolifically sing at night. In fact, nightingales will often sing avidly in the day as well, although this often tends to be males who are holding territory. So for a bird with such an unrivaled reputation for song, many people are actually quite shocked upon first hearing a nightingale. So a kind of successions of rippling grunts and whistles and tweets and gurgles and croaks, they all sound a little bit unusual, but to be honest, it's the unrivaled variety that makes nightingale song so special. Now, the nightingale is actually thought to possess an enlarged brain for higher cerebral functions, giving it a reputation for song like no other. Now, in fact, a study actually concluded that the nightingale is capable of producing over 1,100 individual syllables. Now, if you compare that to a skylark, it's 3 times the number. If you compare it to a blackbird, it's more than 10 times the number. Absolutely astonishing.
I'm going to play one of the classics of the recorder repertoire. This is a piece called The English Nightingale, and it was written in around 1650 by the blind Dutch musician Jacob van Eyck. And it's a set of variations on a popular song called The Nightingale, but in these variations Van Eyck makes use of a lot of the bird-like capabilities of the recorder.
I thought it was fantastic actually, and it
Thank
really
you.
captured the very unique spirit of the nightingale. And I guess the thing about the nightingale is, it very rarely creates the same phrases. It's always changing things. It's always shifting up. It will, go from a sort of fluty crescendo, to a very low gurgling with sometimes lots of repeated notes. They almost seem to get stuck on the same section. And I noticed actually there were some parts in the piece where there were some very kind of insistent repeated notes.
That's right.
And those parts really reminded me of Nightingale Song. I think, the pacing of Nightingale Song is very dramatic and it's very emphatic, and perhaps, the pauses in Nightingale Song are actually as dramatic as the song itself. So perhaps in that instance, the song is quite fast paced in relation to what their actual song is like. But there were certainly a lot of key elements that I actually found quite recognisable.
Fantastic.
Now, of course, one of our most prolific singers is the robin. Now, the robin sings pretty much all year round, apart from when they're in molt. Now, often the robins are singing because they're avidly trying to defend their territories, particularly later in the year. And in fact, escalation or violence between robins often does occur. Now, usually robins will sing at each other, desperately trying to get a higher perch in order to show off that red breast as a threat posture. However, escalation may occur from here, and injury or death can even be the result of this. Now, the robin, of course, is often one of the very first, if not the first birds to start the dawn chorus, and it may well be one of the very last to finish singing later on in the day. So robins sing in a really wistful, perky manner, and actually their song is somewhat resemblant of a sort of gently flowing stream. It's very sort of continuous, but it's also quite mellow as well. There's something very nostalgic about the way the robin sings. There's often a lot of trembling notes incorporated into their song, but in all honesty, it's really, really diverse. Some sections are slow, some are fast, some are soft, some are loud. So with robins, it's really a question of listening to the way they sing rather than to what they sing in particular. The wren is a true master of the subterranean. Now, the wren may not be a bird that everybody sees all the time, but unbelievably, it is actually the UK's commonest breeding bird species. Now, the wren has a voice that is literally explosive. It really does belie the size and diminutive stature of the bird itself. It has a real sort of fizzing intensity to it, and wrens will often attempt to outcompete each other in song by singing from within cover. However, they're not at all adverse to singing from a prominent perch, and their explosive song is really unmistakable. It has lots of sort of insect buzzing, rattling trills that are really distinctive, particularly in the second half of the song. Blackbird is perhaps one of our most familiar and most loved songsters. It really does have a fantastic fluting melodic song. Now, interestingly, the blackbird tends to sing in a frequency range that human ears are most attuned to, and this is perhaps why the song is just so pleasing to us. Now, the blackbird is also a fantastic mimic, and not only is it able to interpret and insert other bird songs and calls, but it's actually very good at inserting human sounds as well, something which has no doubt helped to strengthen our affinity towards them. Their song really is very, very mellow, very carefree, and perhaps typifies a beautiful, warm summer evening more than any other species.
So the idea of the recorder imitating birdsong actually carried on into the 20th century when the recorder enjoyed its revival, mostly as an instrument of early music, but it also developed its own contemporary repertoire. And one of the earliest, what we might call squeaky gate pieces, those very funny noise pieces, to emerge for the recorder was by a Swiss composer and recorder player called Hans Martin Linder. And this is called Music for a Bird. And it captures a lot of bird sounds in a much more literal fashion than the music of the 18th century composers.
I really do hope you've enjoyed learning a few little facts about some of the songbirds of Sussex. Now, of course, there is an awful lot more to learn, so please do visit our website for additional information and also to see some of the other ways that you can help the wildlife in our fantastic county. We're always looking for new members, and I would love to welcome you as a new member of Sussex Wildlife Trust.